Imagine for a second watching your home burn to the ground. And I don't just mean your house, I mean your entire city, the center of your culture, your faith, your whole world.
An unthinkable scenario for most of us today.
Right, you're force marched hundreds of miles across this unforgiving terrain. And then when you finally arrive in the capital city of the empire that ruined your life, your captors hand you a musical instrument and tell you to, play a happy tune for their amusement. Like, what do you do in that moment?
The psychological subjugation of that request is just staggering. You weren't just being asked to perform, you're being asked to validate the very empire that destroyed your life.
Yeah. Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we're taking a deep dive into the source material of an ancient text that captures that specific, brutal reality. We're unpacking Charles Spurgeon's The Treasury of David, specifically looking at his exposition on Psalm 137.
And the mission here is to investigate the historical realities of the Babylonian exile, the spiritual weight of suspended praise, and the startling divine justice found in the text.
We are looking at a song bursting with this soft melancholy and fiery patriotism. So we're going to examine it from historical, psychological, and theological angles, pulling from various scholars and theologians referenced in Spurgeon's notes to give you a thorough understanding of why this ancient text still resonates today.
So to comprehend the spiritual sorrow we see here, we first have to grasp the physical and geographical shock the exiles experienced upon arriving in Babylon. Because you can't detach their spiritual state from the new physical reality they were forced into.
Oh, absolutely. That physical shock is where we really need to start. We have some vivid historical details from the scholar Henry Hart Millman in the sources, and he paints this incredible picture of what they left behind. Think about Jerusalem. It's situated on a precipitous ravine. You have sunny cliffs, olive groves growing spontaneously, cool, shaded valleys.
Yeah, it was an irregular mountainous city that reflected the relational nature of their faith. Everything about Jerusalem was built into the natural landscape.
And the temple, it was this small, highly finished fabric standing right on the edge of a cliff. It was organic. It felt intimately connected to the earth.
Right, and now contrast that with where they were taken. The sources detail Babylon as a vast, square-level city. We are talking about massive imperial engineering everywhere.
Just flat, endless grids.
Yes. Broad canals, rows of willows, and the colossal temple of the Chaldean Bell.
That temple towered 8 stories into the sky like a full furlong up, and the palace alone covered 8 miles, featuring those famous hanging gardens built on arched terraces.
The visual contrast is a crucial factor here. The exiles went from a natural, mountainous environment to a flat, mathematically calculated grid of imperial masonry. Babylon was designed to intimidate anyone who walked through its gates.
It was a flex of sheer dominance.
That's it. The architecture itself was a psychological weapon meant to make the individual feel incredibly small and entirely conquered.
But, the sources also note that the Jews were not treated entirely as slaves. They actually built houses, they planted gardens, and they had a relative amount of peace. So I have to push back a little on the traditional narrative of physical misery.
Okay, how so?
Well, if they had homes and if they had some peace in this new city, why the intense, overwhelming weeping? I look at it like moving to a wealthy, modern metropolis. You get a nice apartment, you have a decent job, but you feel a crushing homesickness because the cultural values of this new city are alien to everything you hold dear.
Yeah, that framing is highly accurate. The grief wasn't primarily about physical labor or starvation.
No.
It was a severe spiritual dislocation. You can have a roof over your head and still feel entirely lost.
Exactly. I mean, spot on.
And we see this verified in the specific posture mentioned in the text sitting by the rivers.
Yeah.
The rivers of Babylon, so the Euphrates, the Tigris, the Jaboras, and all the intersecting canals, they provided these shady, cool retreats away from the noisy streets.
They needed to get away from the towering monuments of a religion they abhorred.
Yes, away from the overwhelming idolatry of the city center. They sought out the boundaries of the water, because the boundary line of a river gives solitude a safe back. It acts as a psychological retreat.
Oh, that makes so much sense. When you're looking out over the water, no one can approach you from that direction.
Right. And the posture of sitting is incredibly significant. In ancient times, sitting on the ground was the universal mark of misery and captivity. We actually have numismatic evidence of this from Joseph Addison's notes.
When you say numismatic evidence, you're talking about the study of ancient coins, correct?
That is correct. Roman coins minted by Vespasian and Titus celebrating their conquests depict conquered Judea as the sorrowful woman sitting on the ground with unkempt hair. Sitting in the dust by the water was the recognized visual language of absolute defeat.
So they are sitting by these massive canals and they're weeping. And E.W. Hengstenberg makes an interesting connection here between the weeping and the rivers. He suggests the physical streams mirrored the floods of tears falling from the exiles.
It's a very poetic way of looking at their geographical reality.
Yeah, the watercourses were a physical manifestation of their internal state.
It is poetic, but it also carries massive theological weight. Robert Moody M'Cheyne offers a framework where this entire scene acts as a typology.
Let's pause right there for anyone listening who might not have a seminary background. When we talk about a typology, we are talking about a historical event or person that acts as a symbol or a pattern for a spiritual reality.
You have the concept down perfectly.
Yeah.
M'Cheyne suggests the Babylonian exile is a pattern for the believer who has fallen into sin and feels carried away captive from the presence of God.
Wow.
The weeping happens when they remember the sanctuary they lost. They are sitting in a foreign land, realizing that no amount of Babylonian engineering, comfortable housing, or imperial wealth can replace the spiritual home they forfeited.
It makes you evaluate your own life. Like, think about times when you might have traded your spiritual vitality for worldly comfort. You move into that metaphorical Babylon, you get the nice house and the garden, but suddenly you look around and the environment feels sterile.
Yeah, the realization sets in.
You realize the culture around you is hostile to your faith. And that realization brings a very specific aching type of sorrow. You can't buy your way out of that grief.
It is a sorrow that cannot be fixed by upgrading the circumstances of your captivity.
Yeah.
The exiles understood this entirely. Because the geographical reality of Babylon induced such severe spiritual homesickness, they took a highly symbolic action with their musical instruments.
Yes, the harps and the willows. The text says, "We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof." The sources mention that Babylon was actually known historically as the Valley of Willows.
Which is fascinating in itself.
It is. And there's this great piece of botanical and historical trivia included here about the weeping willow tree itself. It involves a legend about the poet Alexander Pope.
Ah, the famous fig basket story.
Yes. So the legend goes that Pope received a basket of figs from Turkey made of supple willow twigs. He supposedly planted one of these twigs in Twickenham, and that started the entire lineage of weeping willows in England.
It's a great story.
But then the sources point out that John Evelyn's earlier writings actually debunk this legend, showing the weeping willow was known in England much earlier.
It is an engaging piece of history, even if debated, because it draws our attention to the specific physical characteristics of the tree. The branches of the weeping willow are long, slender, and pendulous. When dew falls, drops of water hang at their extremities, giving the tree a mournful appearance.
So it physically embodied the sorrow of the exiles. The environment was matching their grief.
Precisely.
But I want to zero in on a specific detail. They hang their harps. They didn't smash them to pieces. They didn't throw them into the Euphrates River to be swept away forever. It makes me think of someone going through a severe season of depression.
Oh, that's a really good analogy.
They might pack away a beloved hobby in the attic. You know, the paintbrushes or the running shoes are put out of sight, but they aren't thrown in the trash. Why does music fail the distressed soul, yet the individual preserves the instrument?
That's a crucial distinction to make. Every believer has a capacity for praise, symbolized by the harp. By hanging the harps, rather than destroying them, they are making a statement of hope. William J. is quoted in the sources saying, "To be cast down is not to be destroyed. Distress is not despondency."
Distress is not despondency. I love that phrasing. It means you are hurting, but you haven't completely given up.
They preserve the harps because they anticipate a happier period when those instruments will be used again. But in the present moment, as Jay notes, melody is not in season for a distressed spirit. Music, which usually brings comfort, only mocks the grief of a soul in true exile.
Yeah, trying to force a song out of a broken heart just highlights the brokenness.
M'Cheyne breaks down the mechanics of why the music stopped, and his points dig into the human condition. He outlines 3 specific losses that silence a song in captivity. The first is the loss of the sense of pardon.
How does guilt actually stop the music?
Think about what genuine praise requires. It requires a clear conscience and an open relationship with God. When someone is weighed down by the knowledge of their own failure, the internal joy required for melody evaporates. The sweetest tones of a believer's song come from the sense of forgiveness.
So the music biologically and spiritually stops.
Yes, when that pardon feels lost due to wandering or sin, you can't sing freely. You can't sing when you feel condemned.
The second loss M'Cheyne mentions is the loss of the sense of God's presence. Without that presence, the new environment is just a howling wilderness. You're looking at the hanging gardens, but all you see is a desert.
Because the presence of God is what makes any location feel like home. Without it, the grandest palace is a prison.
And the third point is the loss of the sight of the heavenly Canaan. They lost their future hope because they were completely overwhelmed by the immediate reality of Babylon. The sheer scale of their captivity blinded them to the promises of the future.
This is a diagnostic tool for our own spiritual health today. You have to ask, are your harps currently hanging on the willows? Are you unable to find joy or offer praise due to worldly distractions or a heavy conscience? We really have to ask ourselves if the atmosphere of our modern Babylon has silenced our capacity to sing.
In the visible silence of the exiles, the weeping, the hanging harps, it doesn't go unnoticed. It actually attracts the mocking attention of their captors, which leads to a direct confrontation of values.
The captors notice the silence, and they demand a song. They say, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion."
This is a unique type of cruelty. They aren't asking for extra brickmaking or physical labor. They are demanding forced mirth. To use a modern analogy, it's like a captured soldier being forced to read enemy propaganda on television while smiling. It is psychological subjugation. We conquered you, we took your homes, now entertain us with your most sacred traditions.
It is the ultimate degradation. To be plundered, fettered, and carried away is terrible. But to be forced to laugh and sport as if it were a play, that is an entirely different level of malice. They wanted the exiles to burlesque their own holy things.
Right, turning sacred worship into a cheap parlor trick.
Now, pragmatically speaking, I think a lot of people today would look at this situation and say, just sing a quick tune.
Yeah, like, just hum a melody, appease the guards, and avoid getting beaten or worse. Why draw such a hard line over a song? It seems stubborn to risk your life over sheet music.
To understand why they couldn't just go along with it, we have to clarify what was actually being asked. These were not secular folk songs. These were not national anthems about geography. These were Jehovah's songs.
They were theological declarations.
Yes, they detail the omnipotence, the mercy, and the exclusive sovereignty of God. To sing these holy hymns for the amusement of idolaters right in the shadow of the colossal temple of Bel would be an egregious sacrilege.
I see.
It would validate the conqueror's mockery. It would be agreeing that their God was just a defeated local deity whose songs were only good for a laugh.
Thomas Chalmers points out in the sources that this dynamic hasn't disappeared. He says true piety still sustains the mockery of the profane. The world still wants religion to be entertaining. People demand that believers burlesque holy things just to pass an idle hour or to fit in at a dinner party.
The culture of Babylon changes its architecture, but it never changes its demands. The pressure to trivialize the sacred is constant, but the exiles' response to this demand is born of a tender conscience. They respond, "How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land?"
It's framed as a question, but it's an absolute unyielding refusal.
C.J. Vaughan brings in a brilliant insight here. He says the very refusal to sing, documented in this text, is itself a song.
It's a stunning paradox when you think about it.
By documenting their sorrow and their absolute inability to praise in that environment, they created a permanent hymn for the church that has lasted for thousands of years. Their silence became the loudest song they could have ever produced.
Because it was a defense of God's holiness. Any real utterance of good thoughts, whether thoughts of gladness or thoughts of sorrow and refusal, functions as a true melody for the congregation. Their inability to sing was the most authentic worship they could offer in that moment. They were protecting the sanctity of the truth.
So, having refused the captor's demand, the text shifts its focus. The exiles turn inward. They make this fierce individual vow to never let Babylonian comfort replace their true home.
You can see this shift grammatically. The language moves from we to I. It started with we sat down, we wept, we hanged our harps. That is collective mourning. But when the vow comes, it becomes singular. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem.
Individual accountability kicks in. It's one thing to weep in a group where everyone is doing the same thing. It's another to stand alone and make a personal pledge. And the specific phrasing of the vow is intense. Let my right hand forget her cunning.
I want to bring in John Kitto's commentary here regarding Middle Eastern customs. He notes an Arabic proverb about a poor man swearing by the cutting off of his right hand. Why his hand? Because his hand, his skill, his trade, his cunning, is his only stake in society. It is how he survives. So what is the gravity of placing Jerusalem above my chief joy?
It's a total consecration of one's livelihood and capacity. The cunning of the right hand specifically refers to the skill of playing the harp. Hengstenberg explains that the punishment fits the crime perfectly. If the musician misapplies their right hand to play joyful strains for idolaters, then the just punishment is for that hand to lose its noble art completely.
If the tongue sings for Babylon, let it cleave to the roof of the mouth.
You hit the mark there. It's a theological pledge to prioritize God's kingdom above all personal happiness, professional success, or physical safety. The musician is saying, I would rather lose my ability to make a living and create art than use my art to dishonor my faith.
They're putting everything on the line. That is a staggering level of dedication. It forces you to look at your own life. Think about your own right hand, your specific skills, your talents, your livelihood, the thing you are best at. Are those skills consecrated? Or are they being utilized to entertain your own version of Babylon? Are you using your best talents for a culture that is hostile to your core values just to make a living or gain approval?
It is the ultimate question of allegiance. Who gets the best of your abilities? And this fierce loyalty to Jerusalem naturally brings to mind those who cheered for its destruction. This is where the text transitions from a melancholic vow to a very striking and often uncomfortable plea for divine justice.
Yeah, the sudden shift is jarring. We go from sad willows and silent harps to a dark focus on the children of Edom. To understand this, we have to look at the historical context. The Edomites were blood relatives of the Israelites. They were descendants of Esau bordering Judea. Yet during the Babylonian invasion, instead of helping their brothers, they allied with the invaders. They stood by and shouted, raise it, even to the foundation.
They wanted it torn down to the bat earth.
Betrayal from a family member always stings far worse than an attack from a known enemy. If a foreign army attacks you, that's war. If your sibling helps a thief rob your family home and cheers while the thief smashes the heirloom furniture, that's a wound that doesn't heal. The malice of kicking someone when they are down is a specific kind of evil.
The sources expand on this cruelty. It is horrible for neighbors to become enemies, but it is infinitely worse for them to egg others on to malicious deeds. Edom armed their eyes, their tongues, their hearts, and their hands against their brother in the day of calamity.
The Chaldeans were ferocious enough without being excited to greater fury by the Edomites cheering them on.
Arthur Pridham offers a theological synthesis of this betrayal. He says Edom represents the carnal mind's natural enmity against God's elect. Jerusalem was the city of God, and the unregenerate mind aggressively resents any building that rests on divine grace.
That is the core of the conflict. The world doesn't just disagree with the sanctuary. It wants it razed to the foundation. And this section establishes a critical principle of justice. God takes notice not only of what is done, but when it is done. Taking advantage of the vulnerable, striking someone when they are in the anguish of mortal disease, that guarantees divine recompense. The cruelty is aggravated by the timing of the betrayal.
Which brings us to the culmination of this plea for justice against Edom and Babylon. This is the most visually jarring and difficult portion of the text, the impending doom of Babylon and the destruction of his offspring. The text reads, Happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones.
It's a verse that makes modern readers recoil in horror.
Extremely. We have to address the harsh reality of these final verses head on. It's a brutal image.
The sources mention the historical reality of ancient warfare, citing Homer's Iliad, where similar atrocities are lamented as the standard horrific practice of the era. The Babylonians themselves committed these exact atrocities against the Israelites when they invaded Jerusalem. But I have to challenge this. How do we interpret this without viewing the author as purely vindictive?
That's the challenge.
I compare the text's harsh language to a judge handing down a severe mandatory sentence for a horrific crime. It's shocking to hear read aloud in a courtroom, but it is rooted in the law, not just personal revenge.
That courtroom analogy is essential for understanding the passage. We must clarify the historical and prophetic nature of the verse. This is the implementation of the lex talionis.
The law of retaliation, an eye for an eye.
Yes. Babylon is receiving precisely what she measured out to others. Thomas Adams notes in the sources that evil men drink of their own brewing. The thief robs the thief. It is a prophetic declaration of God's retributive justice. The psalmist is foreseeing the historical fall of Babylon. He is accounting the conqueror of Babylon, who happens to be Cyrus of Persia, as happy or blessed because he is carrying out a righteous judgment, ridding the earth of a tyrannical, brutal power. It's not a call for individual believers to seek personal, bloody vengeance.
But there is also a massive theological application here for the individual believer, provided by Robert South. He takes this horrific physical imagery and applies it to the inner spiritual life. He says the little ones of Babylon represent infant corruptions, the first buds and streamings out of sin.
This is the mechanism of mortification. We're talking about how a habit forms. The principle is that if small sins are not dashed against the stones immediately, they grow into audacious presumptions.
How does a habit form from an infant corruption? Walk us through that psychology.
It starts with tolerance. You allow a small compromise. Your conscience pricks you slightly, but you ignore it. The next time, the prick is less noticeable. The tolerance builds. That small compromise grows into a routine, and that routine hardens into a chain.
So it scales up over time.
Right. You can't show pity to small corruptions. The infant sin, if allowed to live and mature, becomes the adult Babylonian captor that will eventually put you in chains and demand a song from you. The believer must deal with these first motions of sin ruthlessly.
The eschatological view is also brought up by Coleman in the sources.
When we say eschatological, we're referring to the study of the end times, the final events of human history.
Right. Coleman notes that the stones represent the rock upon which apocalyptic Babylon, which he identifies historically as papal Rome, will be thrown down like a millstone. The judgment on the historical city of Babylon is a foreshadowing of the final judgment on all systems that oppose God and oppress his people.
The physical reality of the historical destruction points to the internal spiritual reality of mortifying sin, which points to the ultimate cosmic reality of God's final justice.
It makes you wonder about your own life. Are there small infant corruptions, tiny compromises at work, small lies at home, little habits of selfishness that we coddle because they seem harmless? The warning here is stark. If you do not deal with them ruthlessly now, they will mature and they will lead you into captivity.
We have covered a massive scope here today.
We really have. We've traced the line from the physical weeping by the vast canals of Babylon to the absolute refusal to burlesque holy songs for idolaters. We looked at the solemn vow of the right hand, dedicating all skill and livelihood to the truth. And finally, the absolute necessity of crushing infant corruptions before they crush us.
If we look at the nature of being in exile through all these points, a clear truth emerges. True peace is never found by assimilating into a culture that mocks truth. You do not find comfort by joining the Babylonian choir. You find it by keeping the memory of your true home alive, even if it requires weeping by the river.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over. If the exiled musicians' absolute refusal to play a song for their captors was recorded by God as a permanent hymn of praise, how might your silence and your refusal to compromise in the face of modern mockery be its own form of worship?